All right, welcome everybody. We have an amazing session today with a couple unbelievable CROs. We have Art Harding, the Chief People Officer, kind of ex-CRO from People AI, and Darryl Praill from VanillaSoft, CRO from VanillaSoft. So thank you both for being here. I know this session, selfishly and personally, I am incredibly interested in, knowing I've led and scaled several different sales teams in the past. But we have some amazing content here for you, some great questions teed up. And without further ado, Art, you want to give a quick intro here?
Sure. Art Harding, COO for People AI. I do have a responsibility for our sales team as well as our customer success organization, and also our revenue operations business ops team as well.
Very nice. And none other than good old Darryl with the red background, the red curtain.
There we go. And that's a real red background. I could go move that curtain. It's very,
Hey.
very cool. There we go. Darryl Praill, Chief Revenue Officer. I aspire to be a Chief Operating Officer one day. Art, if you leave your job, let me know. And like Art said, I also own sales and marketing. And in that organization, I also own revenue operations and sales enablement. So there you go, VanillaSoft.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both. Again, we have some amazing things. We're going to kick things off a little bit with kind of a roadmap and alignment, right? With what does that even look like? What does it mean? So Art, why don't we kick things off with you? What is a roadmap to alignment? Siloed versus aligned? Kind of what are we thinking about here?
Well, I'm going to speak from what I presume a lot of people assume the definition of a CRO is. And you already heard from Darryl in my intro, he's got sales and marketing. I've got sales and post-sales, but both with that operating middle ground. I think alignment first and foremost starts off with what each of our own definition of teams are, and what our goals are. And whatever your mind map is for a team, if you think only about your team within the department, or do you think within the department within the company, or do you think about ultimately the customer? And I think a great place to start with a mindset around alignment is to make sure that everyone has a shared focus and understands that when you're at a company, regardless of what department, you're all on the same team. And then bringing with that, I think alignment means, in terms of the definition of it, that the different functions that all have a similar charter to manage a prospect or customer from the buyer journey through the customer journey, that we actually all recognize that we all play a role, that none of us can be successful alone, and that we have to develop a healthy curiosity, not just on what we expect from our peers up and down the funnel, but also the constraints that they're dealing with, how to get curious about what they do, and how to resolve conflict with them.
Awesome. Darryl, how about you? What do you think about the
I thought you'd never ask, Pete. So yeah, I mean, alignment is an interesting question. I can't tell you how many panel discussions I've had this year alone on, shall we say, sales and marketing alignment. That's a common topic. But alignment, Art nailed a couple things that were very much important people miss over. He talked about what are the company goals, what are the culture, what does the organization stand for? We're all trying to do the same thing. I love his reference to the customer. And so alignment, in my experience, is kind of like this. What brings us here? Why do we take this job? What is this company trying to achieve? Let's have alignment, consensus that we're trying to hit certain corporate goals. We're trying to represent a certain company culture. We're trying to deliver a certain experience to the customer. These are all shared values and shared goals and objectives. All right. And that can be reflected and fulfilled and guided through the use of OKRs or other, metrics or processes to make sure that's always there. But the bigger thing that we often see why alignment is critical is because people always kind of do the us versus them. Sales will say, marketing sucks. Their leads are awful. I need to do everything. Marketing will say, sales sucks because they never follow up on the leads and they tell me my leads suck and they just annoy me. And success will say, you guys both suck because without us, we're the ones that stop the churn. And without, we're the ones that actually know what's going on. Sales, marketing, you're doing all this messaging. But in success, we hear what the customers really say. And all of the hype that you do is BS and we're playing cleanup. So you have a lot of us. What you want instead alignment, which is basically what are the rules of engagement and what are our roles? So I hate the sports metaphor, but the sports metaphor is the best, which is if I'm going to take that field, I've got offense, I got defense, I got plays. And when I have plays, you go here, you go there. And we need both offense and defense to do that if the goal is to actually go and score a goal and win the game. So that's what it is. Rules of engagement, what are the abilities to escalate? What are the abilities to resolve? And then, how do I work within that? And I need to understand we're working together. So that's what alignment is, not us versus them, but it's us to achieve these goals and we're working together.
And Pete, if I could throw a couple comments on here. Yeah. I think too many people think alignment equals agreement. Okay. What alignment equals is more awareness. And if you take the idea of whatever sort of team, sports team or whichever, if you've watched two components of a team point fingers at each other in the middle of a competition or in the middle of pursuit of something, we all know how unattractive that is. If the offense is blaming the defense or the coach is blaming the athlete or the student's blaming the teacher, at the end of the day, they should have a joint goal of what they're pursuing. And alignment just means awareness. And Darryl touched on, rules of escalation, rules of engagement. I think it's really key that when you're working cross-functionally, you start off with that curiosity that I mentioned so that you can develop vocabulary, develop some empathy around the constraints that your business partners are dealing with. Only through that will you be able to resolve conflict. And as we get more senior in our careers, if you've ever looked up at your leader and go, I don't know what he or she does all day, I will tell you, as you go from an IC on a team, from a frontline manager into more senior roles, more and more of your time is actually spent working cross-functionally on this topic of alignment.
Oh, I got to jump in there, Pete. Pete, you're doing a great job, masterful job of moderating us. I want to compliment you on that one. We talked about a common vocabulary. So one of the things I talk about trying to get alignment often is doing some very simple exercises early on. And that is getting the stakeholders together in a room and getting some consensus on some shared terms, for example. So for example, it could be, I got the head of success, I got the head of support, head of sales, head of marketing, and some of the key stakeholders. And I say, okay, I want you to describe our ideal customer profile. Just go ahead, just throw it out there. And everybody's like, I got this. And they all say it and they're miles apart. And then I want you to say, okay, I want you to describe what an ideal lead prospect looks like. Oh, no problem. And then they're miles apart. And then they all look at each other like, are you drunk? Are you drunk? And if you don't do those exercises, you go about your daily business having completely different comprehension and understanding of what each other's trying to do. And that's where the conflict comes in. So getting that alignment, doing some of these exercises early on, rules of engagement, rules of escalation, accountability, common vernacular, that just makes so much of the heartache go away.
Absolutely. That kind of leads us into a quick little question here, but, being a CRO, you're responsible for so many different aspects, right? And typically a CRO is, comes up through the sales ranks, director, VP, senior VP, executive VP, right? But how can you be a CRO if you've really never done marketing or, been a part of a customer success team? How do we go about that? When you're responsible for those teams that you've never really been a part of?
All right, I'll let you go first, man.
I think the first part of that, Pete, in terms of framing that I'd like to challenge is that I think a lot of people assume the CRO comes from the sales ranks. I think more and more we're actually seeing that. I think a majority of CROs absolutely not only have experience in sales, maybe a majority of their experience is in sales. The quantity of pure sellers that move into the CRO role with no other cross-functional experience whatsoever, in my opinion, is diminishing or a less common scenario. What you're seeing is people who have had time in sales, but also spent some material time, whether it's GM of a product, in a marketing role, in a post-sales role, in an operations or enablement role. What I see amongst my peers is whenever we get together, if Darryl and I were doing a call, the first question we'd have to ask is, so what does CRO mean at VanillaSoft? He'd say, what does COO mean at People AI? And how long have you had that remit? And when do you think it will change next? The scope and scale of my role over my last few companies has always adapted and adjusted to what the business needs. And I think that's probably the top characteristic of the CRO, to finally answer your question, is you've got to be adaptable. You've got to be super curious. You've got to know how to be able to attract and retain talent, because you're not going to know how to do everything that's within the scope of your remit. And you're going to have to, learn how to trust and empower people who do.
Your question kind of has two variations. How can I possibly do this if I've never, done anything other than, say, sales? Yeah, now I own sales and maybe marketing and maybe success, the whole customer journey, if you will. I have no idea. So that's one situation where they've just said, congrats, you're CRO. And you're going, oh my goodness. But that's the other situation too, when you're earlier on in your career and you aspire to be a CRO and you want to say, how do I best position myself? So let me answer this first situation, then I'll answer the second one. If suddenly you've been handed the keys to the kingdom, but you don't have all the skills, the worst thing you can do is assume that you know the skills you don't have. I watch marketing all the time. They do press releases and they do emails and they do blog posts. How hard can that be? Right? This is easy peasy. So instead, what you need to do is you actually need to do a couple things. You need probably three things. You need to actually interview all your people to understand what the hell it is they do and really drill down. Don't just half-ass listen, ask questions. Two, you need to actually really rock their world and spend some time actually doing their job. Say, no, I want to write this email. No, I want to build this webinar. No, let me play with some keyword optimization. Even though you're the CRO, spend a little time up front and do that. A, they'll love the fact that you're trying to learn. And B, you will go, damn, this is harder than I realized because my email that I thought was awesome didn't convert. Oh my gosh, it is harder than I thought. And then the third thing you should do is call a lot of your peers in the industry who are heads of marketing in that example and say, okay, Joe, okay, Mary, tell me what I need to know, and be humble about it. Now, if you're earlier in your career, the second part, then what you need to do is get yourself in positions that you can do that. Myself, case study, I'm a computer programmer by trade. And then I got tired of coding. So I went through from coding to sales engineer, to product management, to product marketing, to sales. And then I went back and forth to the sales and marketing. So I had enough experience. I did that over several years. And that was intentional because I knew I wanted to be a senior executive. It was probably going to be in sales or probably going to be in marketing. So I wanted to have all the experiences. So you have to be really intentional about it. It's very easy to get comfortable where you're at. And when I say you have to actually go actively and do that, it might mean taking a pay cut to change jobs to get that on your resume. But now you look more appealing at that next job. You got to think long term.
Darryl, there's two things I wanted to touch on there. The first one is I have a term for what you described there. I call it taking a core sample. For anyone who has relatives in the oil and gas industry, they take a really long core sample out of the earth to study it. No matter how senior you are, how broad your remit is, every once in a while, actually quite regularly, I believe in taking core samples all the way down to Darryl's point. Sit next to someone who has a job that you may not be aware of and just get curious and say, how does this work? Why does it work this way? What do you wish could get better about this? And just really lean into it because everyone's got a job on a team and they all have some challenge. And it's interesting, I started out as a software programmer as well, moved up to project management, et cetera. But the second thing that you mentioned in terms of pursuing people's advice and the humility to ask questions, nothing breeds quick intimacy in relationships, especially with hard-charging, competitive, intelligent people moving into senior positions, than the first person who's humble enough to just lower their guard and say, boy, I have no idea what I don't know in this space, and I was told that you're someone to connect with on this topic. It's a great way to not only learn and grow, but also to make real connections with folks. But it takes courage to be humble enough to actually say that.
I'll give you an example of exactly what Art's talking about. When my firm approached me, and for those who don't know, for context, I was hired back in 2017 as the Chief Marketing Officer. And it was only July 1st in 2020 that I became Chief Revenue Officer here at this organization. I had previously been VP of Sales multiple times, but I'd never been a CRO. Notice how I said I've been a VP of Sales, I've been a head of marketing, I'd never been CRO. And that's a different job. CRO does not equal head of sales, so we're clear on that. Before I took the job, before I said yes, because trust me, I wanted the job. I lobbied for the job. And then here was the job dangled, and I didn't immediately say yes. Instead, I called about 5 people whom I dearly respect and trust. And not every one of them am I tight with, but we're professional colleagues, and I respect them. And I said, here's the situation. Do you have half an hour to talk? I need to bend your ear. What am I getting into? What would you do in your first 100 days? So, what do I need to know going in? What advice do you have for me? Why shouldn't I take this? What should I be prepared for? Yada, yada, yada. And, that helped dramatically.
Very cool. It's almost like, to get back to that core sample really quick, it's almost like that drives a curiosity, right? Curious piece of driving a core sample, going to talk to somebody. What are they doing? It's pretty cool. All right. So for those that don't have much experience or have, a little bit of experience, how do we get to be a CRO, right? We know your past, computer engineering, right? marketing side, maybe some operations side. But if you were to look back in your career and say, okay, this is the path that I would kind of recommend to becoming a CRO, what does that look like?
I know Art's got some awesome answers here. I was, for those who don't know, we kind of put down our thoughts on paper in a shared Google Doc. So I have a preview of some of Art's thinking, and I expressed in backstage how annoyed I was at how smart he is. So I'm going to let him go first.
Well, that's a tough lead-in.
There we go.
Well, the first thing that I did not do earlier, I would have done earlier in retrospect, is really take the time to differentiate between talents and skills. Every one of us have a set of talents. And I think a lot of times we want to focus on developing skills that offset deficiencies, where I think at some point I actually took a contrarian approach to that and said, okay, what are my talents? Where do I naturally have strengths? And how do I develop skills on top of those strengths? And as Darryl was just talking, start building your team, because the most underrepresented asset when you look at a senior leader, none of us actually have any idea how much support he or she is getting in that role, both at home, professionally, from their team. There's no one at the top, by themselves. They're only there as some, aggregation of this. So find out what your talents and skills are and figure out how to team and partner with people who have talents and skills they've developed that are some of your weaknesses. And you kind of hunt as a pack as you move through the industry and move through the ranks would be my first advice for younger folks. The second thing, probably the most overlooked one, is, whether it started off writing software, project management, being a pre-sales engineer, sales rep, operations, services, the only thing I can tell you that was absolutely consistent is I did my job. And especially early on in your career, if you want to go pursue whatever senior executive position it is, table stakes is doing your job, ideally doing it a little bit better and a little bit faster than everyone else to create space. That space is a privilege that you get to invest. And the best place to invest it is in your teammates and in others. It helps you grow, it helps you learn, it demonstrates leadership qualities. But the first step is you got to be great at your job, which means you got to know what success looks like and you got to give a bleep, right? And if you have those two parts of your success formula and you bring a great attitude, then you can be a good thinking partner, develop that curiosity, develop that support network. And I would be less concerned with defining a clear path. And I would reference, and then as I hand it off to Darryl, just think strategically about what the leaders, CROs, if that's your objective, in your industry, look at their backgrounds, look at their characteristics. The paths will be very different. But as Darryl mentioned, I've taken 2 or 3 sizable comp and title changes in my career to pursue what I thought was strategically relevant for what I wanted to achieve. And, you've got to think that way, but you also have to be flexible to kind of move with the program. It is not a staircase. It's more like a squiggly line in the general direction that you're headed.
Reminds me of that meme with how you think you're mapping it out, but it's really, going all over the place. So
exactly.
Makes sense. Yep. All right, Darryl, what do we got?
In my career, building on that, investing in yourself, for different opportunities, I've changed countries and moved. I've taken pay cuts. And I've gone into jobs I've never had before where my wife was scared crapless for me. And I'm like, it's okay, honey. I'm pretty confident I won't get fired in the first 6 months at least. So there's an element of risk, full admission, but the risk is in the pursuit of you developing your skill set. So if you want to become a CRO someday, and Art talked a little bit about this already, he talked about just, you got to give a crap and you got to do your job. That's the starting point. And people will trust you if they see you generating results. That's just, if you don't generate results, don't even think beyond that, or, fix this before you think about that. Second part is you have to actually understand business. So there's a couple of things you need to understand. All right. What I'm doing as a sales rep or a marketing specialist or a sales manager or a marketing manager or a sales director or the marketing director is I'm doing a lot of tactics. And the more senior I get a little more strategic, but it's a discipline, right? What you need to understand to be considered for these senior roles, especially at a CRO level or C level, you need to understand the numbers. What are the numbers of the business? When I was head of marketing, I knew our sales numbers better than my head of sales. I knew our conversions. I knew everything. All right. And it was there for everybody to consume. All right. I knew what the industry was doing. I developed contacts in the industry. So they knew they weren't just getting me, they were getting my network that all came. So all of these are skills. You have to actually be credible. You need to be able to work with your colleagues and other adjacent departments and recognize that, hey, yes, I'm in this role today. I was a CMO, but support's having some problems. I can see that they're swamped. What if we actually made a whole bunch of videos to help your support guys so we can reduce the load? Everybody goes and goes, oh, look, they're thinking beyond their department. They're thinking strategic. That's a huge, huge thing. Now, the last thing I will say to you is there is a lobbying and a bureaucracy process. So when I was in about a year and a half into the role, I could kind of see a lay of the landscape. And I made a passing comment when the time was right, when I'd established trust, when I was credible and had a reputation and built those being reliable, to say, if you're ever looking to make a leadership change in the sales function, I would be interested. And I will tell you that the first reaction from the CEO was laughter. Darryl, you're a marketing guy, right? Why would I ever? And I'm like, I've done this. I've been a head of sales. Yeah, that was years ago. You're going to get that. You just need to persevere and insert yourself in the process. I inserted myself into as many deals as possible. So I became instrumental. I became a sponsor. Again, visibility. Again, I could speak to the account when we were doing actual war rooming or whatnot. People pick up on that so that when the time for change happens, you're at least a candidate they're considering. And that's how you do it.
A couple of things to throw on top of that in terms of specific tactics. I talked earlier Darryl just talked about trust. The trust comes from doing your job. When you do your job well, you create the space to invest in yourself and others. And if you're not, then work harder and create extra space. That's often a tip that's not said in these forums. There's a lot of,
oh my gosh,
just warm and fuzzies and honestly, table stakes. The number of people who walk up to me and say, hey, my goal is to be CX, whatever. I'm like, okay, Jimmy. Okay, Bobby. Let's actually talk about your day job first. Make sure we get that nailed down and grow from there. The other thing in terms of specific tips, if you're younger and if you're earlier on in your career, take a look at who you're spending the most time with and what you're feeding your mind. If you're only spending time, if you're an SDR or BDR and you're only hanging out with SDRs and BDRs, if you're in services and you only hang out with customer success folks, you're only getting one version of the story. You're developing groupthink. You're developing group attitudes.
Oh, bless you, brother.
I have found in Pursuit, diversity gets a lot of airplay in terms of gender and race, but I've actually found I've been able to build diverse teams, build diverse relationships just by working cross-functionally in different departments, making sure I have a couple of friends in finance, make sure I know a lawyer, make sure I know someone who works in customer success. And I live in San Francisco where I have friends that are 29 years old and friends that are 59 years old, and we laugh and enjoy and share with each other. And I think it's been one of the superpowers that I've been able to bring into my business world is the power of my network, which is diverse, across many different dimensions. But it takes intentionality and it takes curiosity.
There's one more thing I need to kind of just put to bed here. If you're thinking of becoming a CRO, you need to understand one thing. What you're doing right now in your current role, sales, marketing, success, whatever it might be, is not what you'll be doing when you're a CRO. You will be spending way more of your time dealing with people, being a counselor, being a therapist, being a peacemaker, being a communicator, being a consensus builder, than you will actually doing sales or marketing or success. You've got a team for that. And so if I can give you any advice, build those skills up now.
Awesome. Well, we quite literally have 1 minute left. I'm eager to get, a few seconds of telling young salespeople, much like Darryl kind of just went through a little bit, but what's your motivational 20 seconds to these young folks that are, trying to make in their careers, directors, VPs, even, BDRs and SDRs? What can they aspire to be? What's some motivational here?
So I'll make mine quick. One of my core values is growth. I think if you focus, I've been fortunate to work with a number of high growth companies, and while I'm sure my talents and skills and habits and attitudes have contributed to it, a rising tide lifts all boats. If you can find high velocity growth companies, there just will fundamentally be more opportunities. And then just have a high say-do ratio, do what you say, build credibility beyond your organization in the environment around you. And to Darryl's point, what you're doing today is not what you'll be doing in the future, but the law of compounding interest applies to everything, not just finance. It applies to networking, it applies to delivering results, it applies to participating in growth companies. So I would seek out growth companies, seek out growth mindset. And I'll close with my passion is I think creating and growing businesses is one of the most amazing things in the world. It creates jobs. It provides returns on investments for 401ks, pension funds, et cetera. So we're in one of the greatest industries in the world, low barrier to entry, global, fast moving, creative destruction. Let's go out and create more jobs and make an impact. So that's what gets me going.
Your career success starts with a job interview. To Art's point, pick the right companies. You get stuck in the wrong company, you're dead, or you've set back several years. So be selective, interview hard, be particular, target them out. That's the first part. Second part is you're responsible for your own success. So stop looking at your employer to develop you. Invest in your own success. Spend your money on you to actually grow your skills. Third part, network like there's no tomorrow, because you never know. Most jobs, those opportunities come through word of mouth. With that all said, what keeps me going, I aspire to be like Pete. So I do this to be like Pete, and that's what makes me happy.
And I aspire to be like you one day.
There we go.
The beard's new, and it looks good on you.
Based on Art and I, you can never be a C-level officer unless you've got salt and pepper hair, and we earned this hair. I want you to know that.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for. I wanted my gray hair so bad one day. All right. Thanks, Pete.
Awesome.
It's been really nice.
Gentlemen, Art, Darryl, I greatly appreciate it. You guys have both been amazing. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.